Her mother chased her out of the house because of a man. In the sprawling chaos of Lagos, where dreams die before dawn and survival demands sacrifices most would never dare to make, there lived a woman who had learned to weaponize her pain. They called her wicked. They called her heartless. They called her a man-eater who destroyed relationships and ruined lives for sport. But what they didn't know was that Zainab had been forged in fire so hot that even hell itself would have shown mercy. This is the story of a girl who killed her father at 14, was abandoned by her mother at 16, and grew into a woman who swore she would never let another man make her bleed, not her blood, and definitely not her tears. But even the strongest armor has cracks, and the universe has a way of testing those who think they've become untouchable. Zainab's story began long before she became the notorious online personality that thousands followed religiously. It began in a small, cramped apartment in Mushin, where the walls were so thin that neighbors could hear every slap, every scream, every plea for mercy that echoed through the night. Her childhood was painted in shades of purple bruises on her mother's skin and the sharp metallic scent of fear that hung permanently in the air. Her father was a man possessed by demons that no amount of prayer could exorcise. He was a trader at Balagan Market, where he commanded respect and wore smiles like masks, but at home, he transformed into something monstrous. Her mother, Al-Haja Mariam, was a beautiful woman whose light had been systematically dimmed by years of abuse. Young Zainab would watch from the shadows as her mother covered fresh wounds with makeup, as she lied to relatives about falling downstairs or walking into doors, as she shrank herself smaller and smaller to avoid triggering the beast she had married. What tortured Zainab most was not just witnessing the abuse, it was her mother's acceptance of it. Al-Haja Mariam had been conditioned to believe that marriage was a woman's ultimate achievement, that enduring a man's cruelty was somehow noble, that leaving would bring more shame than staying. She would tell Zainab, even through swollen lips and blackened eyes, that this was what women did. They endured. They persevered. They sacrificed. But Zainab was different. Even as a child, something in her refused to bend. She questioned everything. Why couldn't her mother fight back? Why didn't they leave? Why did society treat her father's violence as a private family matter while celebrating him as a successful businessman in public? These questions festered in her young mind like wounds that wouldn't heal. The night everything changed, Zainab was 14 years old. She had just finished her junior WAEC exams and was looking forward to the long holiday. But that night, her father came home drunk and angry, ranting about some business deal that had fallen through. The beating that followed was different from the others. It was more vicious, more prolonged, more terrifying. Zainab heard furniture breaking, heard her mother's screams reaching pitches she had never heard before, heard her father's voice promising to kill her mother this time, to finally finish what he had started years ago. Something inside Zainab snapped that night. Not loudly, but quietly, like a rope that had been fraying for years finally giving way. She realized with crystalline clarity that if she didn't act, her father would eventually kill her mother. And perhaps, in his rage, he might kill her too. The police wouldn't help. The neighbors wouldn't intervene. The relatives would counsel patience and prayer. If anything was going to change, she would have to change it herself. The next morning, she went to school with a mission. In her agricultural science class, they had recently learned about poisonous plants native to Nigeria. Her teacher, Mr. Delik, had warned them extensively about a particular plant, its innocent appearance, its deadly properties, how even a small amount could cause cardiac arrest within hours. He had shown them pictures, described its effects in detail, explained why they should never, ever handle it without proper protection. Zainab listened with the attention of someone taking notes for an exam. But she wasn't studying for school anymore. She was studying for survival. That afternoon, she took a different route home, one that passed through a bushy area where she knew the plant grew. She found it exactly where she expected, picked several leaves using a plastic bag to protect her hands, and tucked them carefully into her school bag. At home, while her mother was at the market and her father was still at work, she ground the leaves into a fine powder using the mortar and pestle, her hands steady, her heart surprisingly calm. That evening, she offered to help her mother prepare dinner. Al-Haja Mariam, delighted by this rare show of domestic interest from her rebellious daughter, gladly accepted the help. When her mother's back was turned, Zainab added the powder to her father's portion of stew, stirring it in until no trace remained visible. They ate dinner as a family that night. Her father complained about the stew being too salty but ate it anyway. Zainab watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. 3 hours later, he complained of chest pains. 4 hours later, he was gasping for air. 5 hours later, he was dead. The doctors called it a massive heart attack. They cited his high blood pressure, his drinking, his stress. No one questioned it. No one suspected the quiet 14-year-old girl who cried appropriately at his funeral. No one knew that she had slept soundly for the first time in years the night her father died. But if Zainab expected her mother's life to improve after her father's death, she was devastatingly mistaken. Instead of grieving or healing, Al-Hajja Mariam seemed lost, incomplete, like a satellite that had lost its orbit. She wandered through the house like a ghost, and Zainab realized with growing horror that her mother didn't know how to exist without a man, even a man who brutalized her. For months after the funeral, Al-Hajja Mariam announced she was remarrying. His name was Chief Bello, a wealthy trader from the same market where her father had worked. Zainab protested vehemently, but her mother wouldn't listen. She was convinced that Chief Bello was different, that he was kind, that he would take care of them. For the first few weeks, Chief Bello played the role perfectly. He brought gifts, spoke softly, smiled often. But Zainab had learned to recognize predators, and she saw through his performance immediately. She watched and waited, knowing it was only a matter of time before the mask slipped. It took 6 weeks. The first time Chief Bello hit her mother, he apologized profusely, blamed alcohol and stress. The second time, he blamed her mother's cooking. The third time, he didn't bother with excuses at all. Al-Hajja Mariam fell back into her familiar patterns of acceptance and excuse-making, and Zainab felt her contempt for her mother growing like a cancer. But Chief Bello's cruelty wasn't limited to her mother. He started directing his attention toward Zainab, leering glances at first, then inappropriate comments, then accidental touches. Zainab recoiled from his advances, her skin crawling every time he came near. But the worst came one afternoon when her mother was away at a prayer meeting. Chief Bello cornered Zainab in the kitchen, his intentions clear in his eyes. He grabbed her, his hands rough and insistent, his breath hot and disgusting against her face. Zainab fought like a wildcat, scratching and biting until he finally released her, cursing and threatening. When her mother came home, Zainab immediately reported what had happened, certain that this time, her mother would finally choose her daughter over a man. Instead, Al-Hajja Mariam slapped Zainab across the face and accused her of lying, of trying to seduce her stepfather, of attempting to destroy her marriage out of jealousy. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Her own mother, the woman she had killed to protect, had chosen her abuser over her own child. Chief Bello, emboldened by his wife's support, told Zainab she had 1 hour to pack her things and leave. She was 16 years old with nowhere to go. Her mother watched silently as Zainab stuffed 3 outfits into a bag, her face a mask of righteous anger. No tears were shed. No goodbyes were exchanged. Zainab walked out of that house and into the unforgiving streets of Lagos, carrying nothing but a bag of clothes and a heart that had turned to stone. The streets were brutal teachers, but Zainab was an excellent student. She learned quickly that weakness was death, that trust was suicide, that men saw women as either possessions or prey. She refused to be either. She slept in bus stops initially, then in makeshift shelters with other homeless youth. She sold cold water during traffic, ran errands for market women, did anything that kept her fed and off the radar of those who would exploit her. But Zainab was smart, smarter than circumstances should have allowed. She studied the streets like she had once studied textbooks, learning the rhythms of survival, identifying opportunities where others saw only obstacles. She noticed how men with money were often lonely, how they would pay for company, for conversation, for the illusion of connection. She learned to package herself as a product they desired while never giving them the one thing they truly wanted: power over her. By 18, Zainab had transformed herself completely. She had learned makeup from YouTube tutorials watched on cheap Android phones in internet cafes. She had cultivated a persona that was equal parts alluring and untouchable. She had mastered the art of making men feel special while simultaneously keeping them at arm's length. She called them sponsors, benefactors, clients, anything but what they wanted to be called, which was boyfriend or lover. She played them expertly. She would target men in unhappy marriages, men whose wives had grown tired and bitter from years of mistreatment. She would seduce them not with her body, which she guarded fiercely, but with attention, with listening, with making them feel powerful. They would spend money on her, buying her clothes, paying her rent, funding her lifestyle. And when they asked for more than she was willing to give, she would move on to the next one without a backward glance. But Zainab's true genius was in recognizing that her experiences were not unique. Lagos was full of women with similar stories, women who had been broken by the system and were looking for ways to survive it. At 20, she started an Instagram account called Z the Queen, where she began sharing her philosophy. Never let a man control you, never depend on a man for your happiness, never believe a man who says he'll change. Her content was raw and unapologetic. She made videos calling out married men who cheated, exposing tactics men used to manipulate women, sharing strategies for extracting money from men without giving anything in return. She preached financial independence, emotional detachment, and ruthless self-interest. Her following grew exponentially. Thousands of young women who saw themselves in her story, who were tired of being victims, who wanted to learn how to become predators instead of prey. But Zainab didn't just talk. She acted. She maintained a network of area boys, street toughs who handled problems that couldn't be solved with words. When women in her DMs told her about abusive husbands, she didn't just offer sympathy. She dispatched her boys to deliver beatings that left messages on bodies. Touch your wife again, and next time it will be worse. She became a vigilante, administering street justice to men who thought themselves untouchable. Some called her a hero. Others called her a demon. Zainab didn't care about either label. She was simply balancing scales that had been tipped against women for too long. By 22, she had over 200,000 followers. She lived in a decent apartment in Lekki, drove a small but reliable car, and had enough money saved to never worry about tomorrow. She had achieved everything she had fought for: independence, security, respect. She had become untouchable. Or so she thought. His name was Tunde, and he appeared in her life with the perfect mixture of confidence and humility that immediately raised her suspicions. He was different from her usual targets: younger, not wealthy but comfortable, genuinely intelligent and funny. He approached her after she gave a talk at a women's empowerment event in Victoria Island, introducing himself as a digital marketer who admired her work. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. He challenged her ideas without being condescending, shared his own experiences with toxic masculinity, admitted to his own mistakes in past relationships. He was disarmingly honest about his flaws, which paradoxically made him seem more trustworthy. Zainab's instinct screamed warnings, but there was something about him that intrigued her, a puzzle she wanted to solve. They started dating, though Zainab refused to call it that. She maintained her boundaries ruthlessly at first. No spending the night, no meeting each other's friends, no declarations of love or commitment. But Tunde was patient. He never pushed, never complained, never demanded more than she was willing to give. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her walls began to develop cracks. He would send her thoughtful messages that had nothing to do with wanting something from her. He would show up with her favorite food without expecting anything in return. He would listen to her stories, the sanitized versions she told, never the full truth, and respond with empathy rather than judgment. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't laughed since childhood. He made her feel, which was dangerous because Zainab had spent years teaching herself not to feel anything. 6 months into their relationship, Tunde started talking about marriage. Not as pressure, but as a future he could envision. He spoke about building something together, about partners' hip and equality. He praised her strength, her independence, her refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. It was seductive, this vision of a relationship that didn't require her to diminish herself. But what Tunde didn't know was that Zainab had been conducting her own investigation. She had learned long ago to trust but verify, and she had her own methods of discovering people's true intentions. What she found made her blood run cold. Tunde wasn't who he claimed to be. Or rather, he was exactly who he claimed to be, but his intentions were poisonous. Through a friend who worked in tech, Zainab discovered a group chat Tunde was part of. A chat with 5 of his friends where they made bets about women they could conquer. The screenshots her friends sent her were devastating. Tunde had bet his friends 50,000 naira each that he could get the infamous Z the Queen pregnant and make her quit her man-hating content. The chat showed their strategy sessions, his friends coaching him on what to say, how to act, when to push and when to retreat. They called it Operation Humble Her. They discussed how bringing her down would teach a lesson to all the women who followed her, how it would prove that even the strongest woman was still just a woman at the end of the day. The messages showed a level of calculation that would have impressed Zainab if it hadn't been directed at destroying her. Tunde had studied her content, identified her vulnerabilities, crafted a persona specifically designed to slip past her defenses. Every kind word, every thoughtful gesture, every moment of apparent vulnerability, all of it had been performance, manipulation, warfare disguised as love. Zainab sat in her apartment reading those messages, and for the first time in 8 years, she cried. Not because her heart was broken, she had locked that organ away long ago. She cried because she had been right all along. Men were exactly what she had always known them to be. There were no exceptions. There were no good ones. There was only survival and those too weak to fight for it. But Zainab hadn't survived this long by surrendering to despair. As her tears dried, something harder and sharper took their place. Tunde wanted to play games. She would teach him that he had chosen the wrong opponent. He wanted to humble her. She would show him what true humiliation felt like. She continued the relationship as if nothing had changed. She let him think he was winning, let him believe she was softening, becoming more trusting, falling for his act. She started talking about wanting a future together, about maybe being ready for something more serious. She watched his confidence grow, saw the victory gleaming in his eyes. She even agreed to go on a weekend trip with him to Ibadan, a significant step for someone who had maintained such rigid boundaries. But while Tunde was planning his endgame, Zainab was orchestrating something far more devastating. She reached out to her network, the women who followed her, the contacts she had built over years of helping others, the area boys who owed her favors. She crafted a plan that would not only expose Tunde but would serve as a warning to every man who thought he could manipulate women without consequences. The weekend trip to Ibadan was Tunde's moment of triumph, or so he thought. He had booked a luxurious Airbnb, set the scene for seduction, and had even brought a box of condoms that he had secretly tampered with, tiny holes poked through them with a needle. His plan was simple: get her pregnant, and then slowly withdraw, leaving her struggling as a single mother, her brand destroyed, her credibility shattered. That Friday evening, as they settled into the beautiful house he had rented, Tunde made his move. He was gentle, patient, everything a woman could want. Zainab played along perfectly, seeming nervous but willing, trusting but cautious. But just as things were progressing according to his plan, there was a knock at the door. Tunde, frustrated by the interruption, went to answer it. On the other side were 3 young women, all carrying cameras and microphones. Behind them, visible in the driveway, was a van with Lagos Real Talk emblazoned on its side, one of the most popular social media channels in the city, known for exposing scammers and fraudsters. Tunde Adebayo? The lead woman asked, her camera already rolling. We're here to talk to you about Operation Humble Her. The color drained from Tunde's face. He tried to close the door, but the women had already started streaming live. Within seconds, thousands of viewers were watching as they confronted him with printouts of his group chat messages, screenshots of his bets, testimonies from other women he had manipulated in the past. Zainab emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed, her phone in her hand also live-streaming. "Did you really think," she said, her voice steady and cold, "that you were the first man to try to take me down? Did you think I survived everything I survived by being stupid?" What followed was a systematic destruction of Tunde's reputation. The women from Lagos Real Talk had done thorough research. They revealed that Tunde had done this before, targeted strong, independent women, broken them down, and then abandoned them. They had found 3 previous victims willing to speak on camera. They showed bank statements proving he had taken money from women while simultaneously making bets with his friends about conquering them. But the coup de grace was Zainab's own revelation. She disclosed that she had known about his plan for 2 months, that every moment of apparent vulnerability had been her playing him the way he thought he was playing her. She showed her own recordings of their conversations where he had slipped up, revealed his true opinions about women, made misogynistic comments he thought she would never hear. The live stream went viral instantly. Within an hour, it had been viewed over 1 million times. Within 3 hours, Tunde's workplace had released a statement terminating his employment. By the next morning, his face was plastered across every social media platform in Nigeria, labeled as a manipulator, a fraud, a cautionary tale. But Zainab wasn't satisfied with just exposing Tunde. She used the moment to launch something bigger, a platform called The Receipts where women could anonymously report men who had manipulated, abused, or exploited them. She crowdsourced verification methods, built a community of fact-checkers, created a database that would make it harder for predatory men to find new victims. The backlash was immediate and intense. Men across Nigeria called her evil, vindictive, a man-hater who was destroying innocent lives. They organized online campaigns against her, tried to get her accounts shut down, threatened violence. But for every man who attacked her, 10 women rose to her defense. Her following exploded to over 1 million in the weeks following the Tunde exposure. Yet something unexpected happened in the aftermath of her victory. Instead of feeling triumphant, Zainab felt emptier than ever. She had proven her point, had demonstrated that she was untouchable, that any man who tried to break her would be broken himself. But in doing so, she had also confirmed her darkest belief, that genuine connection was impossible, that love was always a game, that trust was a luxury she could never afford. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she would sometimes wonder what her life would have been like if her father had been different, if her mother had been stronger, if she hadn't had to build walls so high that nothing could climb over them. She wondered if there was a version of herself somewhere who could love without calculation, trust without verification, be vulnerable without it being a strategy. But those thoughts were dangerous, and Zainab had learned to shut them down quickly. She had created an empire built on the truth that men were not to be trusted, and admitting that she sometimes wanted something different would mean admitting that maybe, just maybe, she had trapped herself in a prison of her own making. 3 months after the Tunde incident, Zainab received a message from her mother. It was the first contact they'd had in 6 years. The message was brief. Chief Bello had died of a stroke, and Alhaja Mariam was alone again. She was asking, though the word begging would have been more accurate, if Zainab would come see her. Zainab stared at the message for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sympathy. Just the vast emptiness that had become her constant companion. She could have ignored it. She should have ignored it. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the ghost of the daughter she had once been, made her agree to one meeting. They met at a small restaurant in Ikeja. Her mother had aged terribly, looking 20 years older than she actually was. The fire that had once burned, however dimly, in her eyes was completely extinguished. She was just a husk, a shell of a woman who had spent her entire life in service to men who destroyed her. Alhaja Mariam tried to apologize, but the words were hollow, inadequate. She cried and talked about regret, about mistakes, about how she wished she had been stronger. Zainab listened without expression, feeling like she was watching a stranger's confession. "I see you on the internet," her mother said finally. "Everyone talks about you. They say you're successful, powerful. They say you help women." She paused, her voice breaking. "They say you're heartless." "Is that a question?" Zainab asked. "No," her mother replied. "It's an observation. And I recognize where that heartlessness came from. I gave it to you. Not intentionally, but through my weakness, my inability to protect you, my choice of men over my own daughter. I turned you into what you are." Zainab felt something crack inside her chest, but she refused to let it show. "You didn't turn me into anything. I made myself. Every choice, every action, every brick in the walls I built, that was me. You were just the first lesson in a very long education." "What did you learn?" her mother asked. "That love makes you weak. That trust makes you vulnerable. That men see women as things to be used, and the only way to survive is to use them first. And has that made you happy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Zainab wanted to say yes, to confirm that her philosophy had led to satisfaction and peace. But she found she couldn't speak the lie. Happiness wasn't the goal, she finally said. Survival was. And I survived. Her mother nodded slowly. Yes, she said. You survived. But Zainab, my dear daughter, is survival enough? They parted without resolution, without reconciliation, without the neat closure that stories are supposed to provide. Zainab went back to her apartment, to her followers, to her content, to her fortress of calculated indifference. But her mother's question haunted her. Was survival enough? She had spent 8 years building an empire on the ruins of her trauma. She had helped thousands of women, protected countless more from men who would have destroyed them. She had proven that women didn't need to be victims, that strength was possible, that independence was achievable. But late at night, in the quiet moments between the content creation and the brand partnerships and the speaking engagements, Zainab sometimes caught herself wondering if she had won the battle but lost something more essential in the process. She had become invincible, but invincibility required isolation. She had become powerful, but power required emotional distance. She had become legendary, but legends are stories people tell about others, never themselves. The story of Zainab doesn't end with a resolution because it couldn't. She continues to this day, still creating content, still helping women, still maintaining her walls against a world that has proven time and again that those walls are necessary. Her followers see her as an icon, a symbol of female empowerment, a warrior who refuses to bow to patriarchal expectations. But sometimes, in moments she would never share with her audience, Zainab allows herself to remember the girl she was at 14. The girl who thought killing her father would save her mother, who believed that one act of violence would end the cycle of violence, who didn't yet know that some prisons are built not by others but by ourselves. She remembers, and then she locks that memory away, because remembering too much makes the walls weaken, and weakened walls let things in. Things like hope, like trust, like the possibility that maybe not all men are predators and not all love is manipulation. And those thoughts are more dangerous than any man could ever be, because they threaten the foundation of everything she has built. So Zainab continues, forever vigilant, forever guarded, forever teaching other women to be as hard as she has become. Whether this is victory or tragedy depends on who you ask. Her followers would say she won. Her mother might say she lost. Zainab herself would probably say that winning and losing are irrelevant categories for those who understand that the game never ends, it just continues, one day after another, until you're either the predator or the prey. And Zainab would rather die than be prey ever again.